Um, I think being well-rounded is a key. Someone who is strictly offensive or strictly defensive, you need to have a little bit of both. I've also just had to tinker with it a lot and play with it and do my own little red teaming, on the small team I have. So you got to be well-rounded, touch, and understand as many different technologies as you can. But then you also have to understand how the business works. And I'm not saying you need to have an MBA, but you have to have an appetite for understanding how the business works. If you're one of those people that likes to be left alone and tinker and you never want to hear anything about the business, it's not going to be a good role for you. But if you have the appetite and interest to understand how you actually support the business and how security can be more than just a cost center, and you can understand how you can enable the security tools to help the business improve in certain areas, that's when you're starting to think, I think, more in lines like with a CISO.
Welcome to the Philip Wiley Show. Take a look behind the curtain of professional hacking and hear compelling discussions with guests from diverse backgrounds who share a common curiosity and passion for challenges and their job. And now, here's your host, offensive security professional, educator, mentor, and author, Philip Wiley.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Philip Wiley Show. Today I'm excited to be joined by Chris Russell. He's one of my friends from the local cybersecurity scene here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And Chris has got an interesting story, and he's also a CISO, which I've had some CISOs on here, but Chris is not your typical CISO. And he's also a fellow brother in iron. So you have to check out his Instagram because he does moves some pretty serious arm. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thanks, Phil. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, one of the things that I share with folks too that I like about people like yourself is I like people that I can discuss more than just cybersecurity with. So you're one of these people that I could talk working out with. I've got
Yeah,
people that do content creation.
powerlifting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of nice sometimes because when you do this long enough, you sometimes want to talk about other things.
Well, I think, you and me, we've been around the block and we kind of realize there's a certain balance in life if you have your mind, body, and soul getting worked out a little bit. And especially in cybersecurity, you can get pretty burned out if you're just burning your mind up all the time and you don't have your body in the right place and maybe your soul in the right place. So, call me a renaissance man, but I think you got to work all three a little bit, and that helps with longevity, but it helps you being sharper at work. One of the reasons why I am so dedicated to working out is I feel like I'm more effective at my job during the day when I've got my blood flowing and I've gone through some stress, so I can handle work pretty easily that way. So I'm sure you can relate.
Yeah, and you usually work out in the mornings, right?
Yeah, pretty early.
Yeah. So that's good. Was one of the cool things for the listeners that aren't into working out, but one of the things that people really advocate for is working out in the mornings because you work out in the morning, you've already accomplished something big for the day. Some cases, if you train like Chris, then the rest of your day is going to be pretty easy because the amount of metal he moves that. So yeah, that's really cool. Another thing I don't think people think about either is you got to recover, and your brain is involved in this whole ecosystem. So your body, the food you feed yourself, the chemicals that you take from the supplements and different things, environmental factors affect you. And so your body's important that it recovers. So doing the exercise and stuff, as you mentioned, relieving the stress and just helping your overall recovery. Plus, as we start getting older, age can affect your mind, and, doing the things you're doing is going to help your mental sharpness.
Yeah, and I think anyone in our line of field, anyone that tinkers with computers a lot, there's a tendency to end up staying up late at night and kind of working really late, and then you're getting up later and you're not feeling good. And one of the reasons why I kind of dedicate myself to getting up early is I can get more work done early when I'm fresh than staying up really late when my mind's not working so well. So if I find, that's the end of the day and I still have something big to do, I'll still go to bed early, but I'll wake up earlier and get it done in the morning. And it's much easier because my mind's rested, it's focused, and I can tackle it before work. And by waking up early, you actually fall asleep, early, and you're not, having problems sleeping. So it's kind of a quality of life thing too for some people. Works for me anyway.
Yeah, that's good. For me, it's hard for me to do anything after a certain hour. A lot
Oh
of
yeah.
cases, there'll be things going on. There was an event going on last week that was disappointed I didn't go to, but it was 40 miles from my house. And, in the wintertime, it starts kind of getting dark out early, and I just don't really feel like being out. So A lot of
Yeah.
times, if it's something in the evening, I don't feel like doing it. A lot of cases.
Yeah. We're getting older.
Yeah. So before we get too far into the show, I always ask my guests to share their hacker origin story. So if you wouldn't mind sharing yours.
Yeah, sure. So everyone has kind of a different path into this space. Mine was through the intelligence community, and I was a human intelligence collector after, in the military and afterwards. And so I was dealing with recruiting sources and, doing strategic debriefings and interrogations and things like that. But at the end of my career, for a period, part of what I was doing was, that was the guy finding people with placement access to networks and systems that we had interest in. And I had to, train people to use these tools that we handed them to install backdoors and rats and keyloggers and things like that. So I was adjacent to it and exposed to it that way. And the fact that no one ever picked up on it and this stuff would just keep feeding us information for years and years and years made me realize that like there's, A, some job security there, but B, maybe wonder how good, security was in the US. Everything I was doing was overseas. Um, but being exposed to the tools and, working with a clearance, I was around cybersecurity before I was even in it. So that was kind of how I piqued my interest into it after I decided Intel was a little political, that I was going to get out of it. I decided, I've been working adjacent to this. I should jump into it. So did some self training, did labs, went back to school, and started as a low level firewall engineer.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's interesting to see the folks that move over from military life once they get into civilian life, getting into cybersecurity. Do you feel like that experience has shown you the urgency to make environments secure?
Yeah, so work around classified systems, you're getting taught things like least privilege and need to know and some of the fundamentals. And I was in the army. I was a tactical human intelligence collector, so I just set up local secure networks whenever we would like make camp, and that was a small, they called them a chin system, but you had to network it, you had to lock it down by MAC address. We had password hygiene. We had all these things we were doing because we were trained for that, but it was the basics of cybersecurity and the OPSEC. So they definitely got me in the mindset of these are things you need to protect and you need to take control, have controls in place to protect sensitive information. So it's kind of a natural transition from the intelligence field into, corporate security.
It really seems like you would understand the seriousness of it better than the average person.
Yeah, yeah, because obviously in the previous life, breaches were highly problematic for actual people's lives, and sources getting burned is not a good thing. And after I was out and I was done with that world, the OPM breach happened, and all of my personal information, all of my background, financials, psych evals, everything they did to give me a clearance was leaked. So I myself have kind of been unfortunately a victim of a breach, and now I have problems getting visas to certain foreign countries.
Yeah, I can one of the things I see all the time, just talking about the seriousness of it, working in security, I've been places where things should have been remediated and not a risk acceptance filed, and you just see sometimes trying to get people to take things seriously and not understand the risk, and so that's just something often overlooked, and that's what makes me think about your background. You mentioned, you were seeing that remote access Trojans, so you understanding the threat actors and what they're doing would really prepare you for a this day and time because that stuff is getting more of a risk. Because I was watching the news recently and they had someone, former general, some officer that was in the government, was talking about how the Chinese were in these different telecom systems and water treatment facilities, and they gain access. They're not there. They're not doing anything. They're just kind of waiting until the opportunity or conflict or these trade wars keep going on to leverage those. And I think a lot of times your average civilian don't really take those things into consideration or realize they could be a target of some of these nation states.
Yeah, so my experience also kind of really instilled upon me the concerns around insider threat, and we, I was a social engineer myself, so the human aspect of social engineering is something that I, understand quite well. And I'd say in the corporate world, people probably underestimate the amount of corporate espionage and insider threat that's going on. Sometimes it's just more crime and fraud. It's not always nation state, but a lot more goes on, and it doesn't get caught, so people don't realize it's a problem. And it's a very hard thing to detect because we're going after the people that have placement access and are supposed to be on these systems and have the privilege. And we've seen recently with ransomware gangs, it's a very commoditized industry now. If their phishing campaign fails, they'll resort to reaching out to developers and offering them, the Coinbase hack was they offered a developer some money, and it was like $2,000. It wasn't even much. But this is I would say, I don't say the beginning, but this is how social engineering from a human perspective is going to kind of say become I would say a bigger part in ransomware and kind of any of the malware gangs, because the human element is still one of the weaker ones, but it's the hardest one to detect because they're not talking to these people over the corporate network. They're talking to them in their personal life.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up because you look at a lot of these major breaches started out as social engineering because the endpoint detection systems are getting so good. That was kind of like the Acura ransomware gang. They were trying to get a foothold in this company. They couldn't get in by normal means, so they end up attacking one of their security cameras. And then once they gained a foothold in the security camera, they did a SMB share internally and then encrypted the files that way. And it's getting more difficult. So people are trying to use other means. And then, of course, social engineering is going to be leveraged more often.
Yeah, we're seeing, Slack getting hacked for session tokens. I mean, the actual endpoint is, EDR has done really good at detecting and kind of protecting that, but now they're finding all these web-based and third-party applications that are very integrated in the systems and have teeth into the greater corporate network.
Yeah. While we're still on the subject of attacks, before we started, you mentioned something about blockchain C2s that were being used.
Yeah, being a blockchain guy, it was very interesting to me to find out North Korea started basically delivering C2 over blockchains, and they're calling it ether hiding. I don't know if it's the campaign, but it's the kind of the attack vector. Yeah, North Korea um, has basically they deploy these smart contracts that have payloads that are malicious on it, and they do some sort of phishing or social engineering campaign or some sort of fake interview, or they compromise some sort of website that people go to, and they just have some basic JavaScript that makes the system call back to the smart contract, but it's calling back in a read-only format, and I believe it's an F call. And so there's no transaction on the blockchain itself, but the payload gets delivered, and it's everything from crypto stealers to ransomware now. And very few systems they're not used to seeing what blockchain looks like anyway, but it's not their typical C2. I remember years ago Discord is being used too. This is the first time we're seeing blockchain, so it's pretty interesting that and it's immutable, and it's really anonymous, and no one can go in and fix it if you don't have the private keys for that smart contract. So it's hard to stop it. You have to block it, but it can, and then they can still update the smart contract, change the campaign, and start attacking other people in other ways with it. So it's something that I think needs to be looked at.
Very interesting. So, with your blockchain background, what got you interested in blockchain?
I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was somewhere like 2015, 2016. I got exposed to, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple, some of these other ones. The 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 blockchain piece behind it, not as much the crypto piece, the blockchain piece behind it was really interesting to me. Having worked in Intel, I'm this guy that's all about truth. I like truth. I like what I can hold on to and know is true. And the immutable, nature of the blockchain and the fact it could be true, and it's very hard to get it to lie and very hard to like change the data was really interesting to me. And I thought, okay, there's something here, because that's one of the problems we have is people can go back and change data, delete data, and having a record you can keep updating it, but you can't go back and change it was really interesting to me. So I dug into it more, did more, tinkering with it. I think I built some Bitcoin miners and ETH miners, and then I had different when I was working at an MDR farm at the time, so I had access to all these endpoints. So I'm like, I wonder what it looks like to these endpoints. And all the EDR tools looked at most of the blockchain tools as malware. The heuristics of peer-to-peer connections and unsigned binaries and random directories, they would just quarantine it immediately. But I got to see from the tools perspective what it saw and what it looked like, and that it would do packet captures. And so I just was kind of really interested on like what was going on behind these wallets and mining applications from a packet perspective. So I was just kind of playing around with that as a, an interest. And I started writing I had to write them for myself, some exceptions so that these tools that were legitimate were getting quarantined. But also cryptojacking started. So I wrote some signatures to detect that to help, people with our cloud and, cloud monitoring that we had so they would get, early detection on cryptojacking.
Very cool. So if someone wants to get into learning this technology, what do you recommend?
There is a ton of open source information on from the different blockchains about, they all have white papers. That's a good place to start. And they also have a lot of developer tools. So I think it's a fun exercise to play with it, build something, launch a little small blockchain or launch one of the applications or have one of the wallets launch and then do a little packet capture of it and see what it looks like and just kind of get under the hood and you kind of, you know, once you see a little bit of how it works on the back end, it becomes a little bit more interesting on the front end, in my opinion. But ton of information out there. That's the way I did it. And back then there was less. Now that I'm doing more projects with building the developer world for Ethereum and Avalanche and Stellar and Ripple, it's pretty significant. So there's a lot of pre-built tools you can play with. You can do a lot of interesting things with them. But if you have access to security tools like Layer 7 firewalls and EDR, seeing what it looks like to them uh, was the interest for me.
Yeah, it's very interesting because before we started the call, because being around security for a while, I've seen so many different types of CISOs, and most CISOs are more leadership, you know, management, managing people, just kind of seeing the way things should be and all this type of thing, leading the direction for organizations. And all CISOs are hands on, and I think a lot of times that's what discourages people from wanting to be a CISO because you want to move up in the ranks, but then some people worry about losing their technical skills. In a lot of cases, they're not really hearing much about the technical CISO like yourself.
Yeah, I think that was definitely true in the past. I think it's changing a little bit, but I think it comes down to I think people who do really well in this field have that inquisitive nature. They like tinkering with things, they like pulling them apart, putting them together, see how you can kind of twist them and make them do things they weren't necessarily intended to do. So as you're playing with these different security tools and SIMs and EDR tools, I feel like that's the best way to learn how it works and know for yourself how it works. So for me, anytime I had a tool that I was responsible for, I want to know everything about it. I want to be certified on it. I want to be able to go in and do anything I needed to do, not because I didn't trust anyone that worked for me or anyone else I worked with, but they could be wrong too. And if especially if I'm in a leadership position, if I can't offer any sort of mentoring on how a tool works, what kind of leader am I? I don't have to be an expert on everything, but I should be able to teach people something new when they come in. So, this is how Splunk works. These are the standard ports. 8787 and 8000 and whatever it is. These are things you should know if this is a tool that's under your care. Um, from a mentoring perspective in one aspect, but also you're getting asked hard questions on the business side. And if all you're able to do is regurgitate what people tell you, you may be giving them bad information. We're going to go back to that part about me liking the truth a lot. I don't like to be someone who gives bad information. I think, being that intel guy, I want good intel to make decisions. And sometimes you have to be able to do that yourself. And sometimes you have people who work for you that are scared to give you the truth because it maybe makes it look bad. And so you have to know what the truth looks like. And if you have no idea how the tool works, how are you going to know if they're giving you bad information? So I think in this day and age, I think it's a leader's responsibility to know enough about the tools where he knows when he's getting the right answers or the wrong answers, or if information doesn't make sense, or stats or alerts or something doesn't make sense. If you can't tell that, then you can be led astray, and that's when you can have problems that you were blind to, and then you have a breach, and everyone's asking what happened. You're like, I don't know. That's when you lose your job. But when you know, and you have a plan, and you have like a recourse, and you can recover fast. So I think those are the CISOs, if they have a problem, that can retain and continue to work well.
Very interesting. So for someone that wants to take that leap or pivot to move into a CISO role, what recommendations do you have?
CSSP. No, I'm just kidding. I don't even have one. I don't even have one, to be honest. But I think being well-rounded is a key. Someone who's strictly offensive or strictly defensive, you need to have a little bit of both. I did a lot of through my master's and the PhD work I did, had to do a lot of security courses, but I've also just had to tinker with it a lot and play with it and do my own little red teaming, on the small team I have. So you got to be well rounded, touch, and understand as many different technologies as you can. But then you also have to understand how the business works. And I'm not saying you need to have an MBA, but you have to have an appetite for understanding how the business works. If you're one of those people that likes to be left alone and tinker and you never want to hear anything about the business, it's not going to be a good role for you. But if you have the appetite and interest to understand how you actually support the business and how security can help, and it can be more than just a cost center, and you can understand how you can enable the security tools to help the business improve in certain areas. That's when you're starting to think, I think, more in lines like with a CISO. Because the bottom line is you could be really good at, very technical, but if you can't communicate your problems, your needs, or anything to leadership, and you don't get a budget, then you're not going to have much success. Taking a well-rounded approach, but actually caring about the business. You got to remember, the business isn't there to support the security staff. The security staff is there to support the business, and you have to kind of remember that. You may not have interest in it, but you got to remember what the goal is with a lot of these jobs. And if you can do that, then you can understand and put all the technical things in the right context for the right business leaders.
Yeah, and that's going to make you a lot more valuable, make your life a lot easier if you're trying to do that. If you're the department and no, it makes things very difficult.
Yeah, I think the CISO's job is to find out how to say yes in a safe and secure manner, and with caveats. Be like, someone from product has a new idea. Yes, we can do this, but then we need this, this, and this, and it's going to cost a lot of money. But that's how we can do it. But you can't just say no, because then they're gonna work around you or find a new guy.
So, what are some of your tips that you use when you're speaking to the board and other business units to be able to translate, the risks into a language they understand?
I think they understand business use cases that you can relate to in the past, and they can understand things like cost. So if you can regurgitate the price that you pay for each record that is, released during a breach and what that cost is, and say, okay, if it's on average $200 per record per breach, and we have 60,000 records, what's the cost of this if this gets out? So I think it's understanding what fines look like, what's happened in the past in your industry, outside your industry, and bringing up again stories, SolarWinds or Coinbase, understanding what's happened to previous businesses and how we don't want that to happen to us. But it is a translation to business speak. It is a translation to cost. It is a transition to downtime. It is a transition to loss of reputation. It's not so much how many alerts are good or bad or whatnot. They'll drown that out. But you can put in the context of it's not good if alerts are going up. It's not good if attacks are going up because of these other things that can happen. But getting up in front of the board and regurgitating a bunch of numbers about alerts and whatnot is not ideal. It's more about these are the risks we have, and this is the plan we have in place that if something goes wrong, how we're going to get back on our feet really fast.
So, since I know you're kind of a hands-on technical kind of guy, have you been doing much with AI?
Yeah, I use AI quite a bit. We've rolled out in a couple of areas. We have to be very careful in a heavy regulated industry, so we can't input a lot of what we do in our tool. We can't put a lot into it. So I had to do a policy, I don't know, a year or two ago when this first came out, so people understood that I wanted them to be able to use AI, but there's a way we can do it, and they're through authorized applications that we have. But it's definitely a force multiplier on the business side. So you'd be hamstringing your company if you don't figure out how to work with it. And I think a lot of CISOs have been spending time to figure that out. You can't just say, no, this is not safe. It's, okay, here's how we can use it in a safe manner. And that's the approach I took. And that's the approach most of the CISOs I know have taken.
So, I know being a CISO can be very stressful. So, as we kind of mentioned starting out, that you lift. So, what all do you do to kind of help maintain a good work-life balance and to maintain your health and mental health?
I actually do a lot of dancing. I go to raves, I like EDM quite a bit. And maybe it's the tism I have or whatever, but my brain loves the sound of EDM and the different bass and drum and bass and even house music. I go and dance. And when I was in college, I was studying Buddhism, and I had studied different religions too, and I found it was interesting that there's this flow state that athletes get into and musicians get into and religions would get into through things like dance, where you kind of lose yourself in a trance-like state when you kind of get into this kind of repetitive motion. And I find I try and seek that out with music, and I enjoy it quite a bit. It's a place where I can dance and kind of let go of myself and forget the alerts for an hour or two at a time. And then when I plug back in at the end of the night, I feel refreshed and I feel I got to let go of myself for a minute, and it's a little bit of a recharge for me.
Very cool. Yeah, because you hear so many people doing meditation and stuff, so it seems like that may be a way to learn something to do the same thing easier.
Exactly. I read things like Zen and the Art of Archery. People wrote books like Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Repair. It's about doing something. It's doing a task and getting lost into it and letting go of yourself when you do it. And dance is just another form of it. I think athletes get in that flow state where they're reacting. It's like muscle memories reacting faster than their brain can, and they're hitting threes or throwing touchdowns while they're running to the sideline. It's very much the same mindset of you let your brain turn off and you let your subconscious and body take over, and it can do some amazing things sometimes, but it can also be very therapeutic.
Because so many times we let our mind kind of prevent us from doing things. So that's pretty interesting that you do that.
Yeah, like I said, call me old fashioned, but I really like the concept of a Renaissance man who takes care of his mind, body, and soul. And for me, dancing and kind of relaxing and kind of getting that out is kind of like I would say my soul medicine.
Yeah, that's good because too many times it's overlooked, especially in our industry and the people that are technical, even management. They get so lost in whatever that they don't have time for themselves or try to take care of their mental health. They think they're doing all this work, but then later on, there's gonna, if you don't take the time to rest, you don't fix it. You know,
Yeah, it's hard because the your instinct is to spend more time working on the problem you have. You know, like I haven't solved this problem, so I'm going to work on it, work on it, work on it, work on it. And one thing I learned, I was in DLI in 2000, Defense Language Institute, and I was learning Arabic. And what I realized is if I paid really good attention during class for Arabic for about 6 hours a day, and then did nothing with it afterwards and let my brain relax, that I did really well on tests. But if I kind of paid attention and was kind of not paying attention in class and then studied all night too, I just wasn't retaining. I wasn't giving myself that break. So I think some people need to finally to be intentional about giving their brain a rest for it to be more effective in the long run. So it isn't always throwing hours at a problem. It's stepping away from it, doing something active, disengaging from it. And what you'll find is you're doing something else, and all of a sudden that thing that you were missing hits. You're in the shower after your workout and you have some hot water hitting your head, and all of a sudden you realize, that was that was that problem I was trying to figure out. And so being you know being selective with how much time you spend on a problem, I think, is key, because if you don't allow yourself to disengage and recover, you're just going to keep spinning cycles on a problem you're not solving. I like to step away from a problem sometimes, do something very active, take a break from it, wake up fresh and early and attack it. And so far, this hasn't failed me.
that's good advice because one of the things I noticed when I was going through the OSCP certification, and I had to take it multiple times to pass it. But one of the things I was seeing is I would sit there, keep pounding away at something I was trying to hack into, keep on, and nothing happens. But if I stepped away, when took just a 15-minute break, come back, I'd have a lot better luck than just continue to try to bang my head against the wall, not figuring it out.
Yeah, I remember the same thing when I was taking my master's. I had an offensive security class, and in the lab, we had to, get root on all these systems, obviously. You have to go through and figure out which exploit you're going to do, and is it the printer, or using Metasploits. Nothing terribly complicated, but when it's not working, and you're like, well, let me try this, and let me try this, and let me try this, you're just kind of spinning cycles. If you take a second, step back, go make a sandwich, drink some water, go for a walk, come back, you often find, oh, all right, I didn't think about this before, and it was something probably right in front of your nose.
Very interesting. So we're getting down towards the end of the episode. Is there anything you'd like to share before we close it out?
No, I thought we covered some really cool things, honestly. I'm glad we finally got to have this chat. I know I see you around at all the talks and everything, and I'm glad we finally got to sit down and do one of these.
Same. Yeah, it was very cool to get to learn more about you and some of these other things, like what you do for your with your the dance and stuff to help with your mental health and physical. So that's really cool to learn. It's always
Yeah.
fun to learn about people.
Yeah, people when they see me, they see this kind of big, kind of thick guy, and then first of all, they don't assume I'm a computer nerd, and then they also don't assume I'm an EDM fan. And then I'll go to these raves, and I'm like the old guy there, and they probably give off cop vibes or something. But then they see me like dancing and going crazy, they're like, okay, this guy's cool. So it's fun, kind of not being what people expect sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, it is. So thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule. I appreciate you joining today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks everyone, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you for listening to The Philip Wiley Show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. In the meantime, to learn more about Philip, go to thehackermaker.com and connect with him on LinkedIn and Twitter @Philip Wiley. Until next time.